Esther, Gog, Magog, 200 million soldiers, and wooden tanks. Hello, everyone. My name is Persohn. You can contact me at pastor@mascot.church, which is my email address, or in the comments below if you like. We're continuing our quick look into Esther as Gog and Magog, and we're going to now have a look at some of the rather bizarre interpretations of this passage that you might find overall. It's been a very, very busy week. It's going to be a busy day, and I'm realized too late in the week that I need to do a message, so I thought I'm going to grab these very curious elements and get you to think about this, and this will help to understand what's going on here. Now, I lost a lot of my friends in the early 2000s when my eschatology shifted, but particularly the thing that really did it as much as anything else was the march to the Iraq War. And it was really driven, at least from the environment that I came from or where I was at the time, was it had strong theological implications. People drove the Iraq War and pushed it. George W. Bush said that related the need to go into Iraq as the need to oppose Gog and Magog. And that's very interesting. You can find those articles everywhere. They're really, really interesting to find them. In fact, this is how he tried to get the French president, Jacques Chirac, to get involved in the war at the time. The French actually did what everybody should have done, and they went and tested and checked with a theologian who came back and said, well, really, there's no strong basis for this, which is exactly correct. And I'd said the whole time, there's just something wrong here. My friends hung up the phone, they wouldn't talk, and I was tossed out of a ministry organization. All of that, I stood by my case. And now, of course, we know, going back, there were no weapons of mass destruction. We heard it on mainstream media just over the last couple of years. We've heard it for years, that really the whole thing was much different than that. Now, it was driven heavily in America by dispensationalist Christians who I was in that mix at the time, but also certain Jewish groups. And of course, they worked really closely together because dispensationalist Christians would agree with certain Jewish positions that the prophecies of the Old Testament are future and yet to be fulfilled. Because there's some Jews who wouldn't hold that prophecy position at all, like secular Jews and so on. But certain streams really, really did. And you'd find that they would speak at each other's conferences and so on. And so this was like very, very strong at the time. The Australian Prime Minister, John Howard, at the time actually stated his Australia's commitment to go to war, and along with the Americans, the Coalition of the Willing, or whatever they called it back then. It's been a few years. It was a theological event. He was surrounded by Chabad Lubavitch rabbis, or don't know, they were all rabbis, but men in long coats with that sort of Chabad look. And it's important to note here as well that not all Jews held that position, just the same as not all Christians held the position as well. It's just wrong to say Christians believe that Gog and Magog is a future event, or Jews believe that that these things or those things are the case. You need to make some more modest claims. But certainly the Christians and Jews at the time, who were very influential in the Bush administration, the Reagan administration, and continued on, not so much anymore, really pushed for that. But you'll also notice that once a very large nation wants to go to war, they'll find ways to get everybody in on the narrative. They'll use a religious approach to get one side in, and they'll use a different approach now. And you can see that now. You see that both sides of the typical of the argument, maybe to go to war or to make some major foreign policy change, seem to be co-opted. It's like, it's really interesting, but that's how nations do business, and that's just the case, and we get to see that now in our modern times. Well, we're going to have a little look at some of the Gog and Magog interpretations that are out there today, and you can find these. Basically, if you go Gog and Magog, future event or whatever on Google, you'll get lots of these articles. Now, I've been raised around this for so many years, I kind of know which of the hot points to go to here. This is pages and pages and pages. And so a lot of this, you hear 40 years of experience talking, oh yeah, this is the one they're going to use, and that's the one. Some are extremely bizarre and very, very interesting. So my position here is that the book of Esther is the fulfillment of the event that Ezekiel talks about in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And that things like the earthquake taking place and those cosmic signs, which one of my commenters graciously said this was not fulfilled. Well, that's not quite correct, because in prophetic language, this is often used to talk about the fall of nations or a military defeat. You can see it in David's victory over Saul in the Psalms. We talked quite a bit about that. You see it in the Song of Deborah, this sort of action that an earthquake takes place or something. See, from God's eye view, that's maybe how that's communicated. And so we shouldn't be too scared by some of this language. So I'm just going to read some website headings and some comments that will get us right to this very interesting point. You can see the problems coming up here. Now, again, because I hold that position, I can safely say that the Gog and Magog events are not in our time, and they're not future to us. The 200 million soldiers and mounted horseback is not a future event. And it really sets you at ease about a lot of things going on in the world, and particularly about money-grubbing Christians who and others who want to put fear into your hearts. So if you go to Got Questions, I won't bother putting the links. Just if you go Got Questions, Gog and Magog, you'll get an interesting sort of a comment here. They use a get out of jail free card. They say, some say that Revelation 9:16 and Revelation 16, those other passages referring to Gog and Magog, are future events that may refer to Russia, China, and so on. So they have kind of a soft landing approach. They don't want to get caught. You can see that. They do make the comment, however, that the horses that are referred to in Revelation 9:17 are not literal. Okay, that's really interesting. That's curious. Now, this theme is going to come back as we look at some of these other references. That's Got Questions. Some good stuff on Got Questions, and some you'd say, all right, I don't know. Now, the trumpet, which is a kind of started with Herbert W. Armstrong. Herbert W. Armstrong was definitely on the edge of the standard Christian community, kind of moved into it overall later on, but he holds a view that he's passed now, but the trumpet speaks of a view that is really quite common in the Gog and Magog scenario, and it's quite well laid out as an article. They conflate Matthew chapter 24:21 and Daniel 12:1. Do your homework, read Matthew 24, Daniel 12, okay? And they, however, say that the greatest devastation in the Gog-Magog war is going to be America, Britain, and Israel, because in their view, the modern Israel is, or the 10 lost tribes, whatever, are America and Israel. That's kind of the British Israel position. But again, this is not uncommon, and it's held quite strongly. They connect Isaiah chapter 23, which is a judgment against Tyre. They repurpose that judgment, or Tyre. You can read it, Isaiah 23, and they repurpose that into our modern times. Now, if you were to talk to a scholar of the day, they would say, yes, this does apply to Tyre, but it has a second greater interpretation, or second greater fulfillment. This I call double, twice the trouble. It's like, okay, every prophecy that is in Scripture that is fulfilled in that day, like Babylon and Gog and Magog in this case, or Tyre or whatever, yes, it was fulfilled in Isaiah's day, Jeremiah's day, or whatever, or the Old Testament time, but it also foreshadows something else. It's a fundamental problem here. Now, you never find a scripture that clearly says this prophecy will have a second fulfillment, or that says this prophecy is the only fulfillment. And here again, this is a really interesting challenge. There are many prophecies that talk about the coming of Christ, his death, his resurrection, and so on. The New Testament connects those. Well, who's to say that those are single prophecies? Who's to say that those are not going to be multiply fulfilled if we're going to follow this logic? So again, they do hold this position. That is Herbert W. Armstrong's, the ministry that came later on. They repurposed the prophecy against Tyre to mean nations in our day. And what nations are they talking about? Typically Russia, China, Asian people, and so on. Now, Herald of Hope. So Herald of Hope is a lot more mainstream, and they talk about two wars or two invasions that take place, and the first one is led by Gog from the land of Gog and Magog. The second is 200 million soldiers that come from the east. So they literalize this just a little more. Now, by the way, some of these other positions I've just read, Got Questions, for example, never list the possible alternative position, that is that Gog and Magog was fulfilled. None of these people do that. It's very rare to list the alternative position that Gog and Magog could possibly have been fulfilled. Now, Herald of Hope. So Herald of Hope would be kind of mainstream. Herbert W. Armstrong kind of on the edge because of some of the positions that they held. But certainly Baptists, a lot of Pentecostals would hold to what they're saying. So again, they talk about two battles. Where am I getting this from? So they're getting this primarily from Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39 and Revelation 9, Revelation 16. So that they're talking about two battles here. So their first battle, which is apparently future, happening in our time. It's on the way. Sorry, I'm doing this because my glasses here. The first battle is led by Gog from the land of Magog, and almost certainly in their view, that is Russia. Okay, almost certainly. The second one, 200 million from the east. Well, this would be China and other Asian nations coming from the east. So that's interesting. Okay, now John Ackerberg. Now John Ankerberg, and again, you can find his website. There's a very interesting article that is really telling on his website, just very, very telling. And I read through the article yesterday when I was putting these notes together, and noted something at the base of the article. So first of all, what does the article say about Gog and Magog, just following this through? It says that the nations that are going to be part of Gog and Magog, it interpolates, would that be the word, it repositions some of the Old Testament names into our modern national names. Persia, Ethiopia, Libya, and Turkey. So he says Turkey has Gomer and Togarmah. Both of those those historic groups lived in what we would call modern day Turkey. And he says Magog is Russia. So let's just nail this here. So Persia, which would be Iran, of course, isn't it? And you notice all the pressure about Iran coming from all these circles. Persia, Ethiopia, Libya, Turkey, Russia. That's what this article said. Okay, and it talked about how that they would be formed. It talks about I think the European Economic Union. It talks about so many different things. So I read that and I thought, little bit, that's interesting. At the bottom of the article, however, there is a disclaimer, a get out of jail free card again. It's like, and listen to, here's the short form of this disclaimer. You can find it, John Ackerberg, Gog and Magog, and listen to this. It says, current events referred to it says, footnote, this was written in 1996. Current events referred to are no longer relevant. Oh, really? Oh, wow. I'm glad they left that article up there. Because you see, at the time, in the late 90s, this was all the rage. This is what's going to happen. We've got to make war. We've got to go to war. You know what? By the time George W. Bush had talked to Jacques Chirac, this was in the front of like evangelical America and so on. And, Gog and Magog, we've got to stop it. We've got to do all of this. But notice, this article was very strident, very, very strong. If you just read it in the 90s and you'd not done any homework, you'd say, But now, 1996, all right? 1996, 2006, 2016, 2026. Not far off, okay? That's a long time ago, all right? This is 2024, but that's a long time ago. And it says these current events are no longer relevant. Why did they not put this in the article? We were wrong then. We got this all wrong. Well, look, I'm glad for that little disclaimer that's on the bottom here. But the bloodshed that came, oh, terrible. Now, let's just move on here. Now, Friends of Israel lists 6 possible times when the Gog and Magog war could happen, and 6 possible views. They missed the 7th, which is the one that the Gog and Magog war was already fulfilled, has been fulfilled. Ezekiel prophesied it as something that would take place. People in Ezekiel's day would even be part of it. Okay, it was just coming up to there. And that's my position, and it sticks pretty well. But let's look at the 6 that they list down here. So they would say that the Gog and Magog war, some say, every one of these are options here, that it would happen prior to the rapture. The next position 2 is between the rapture and the tribulation. Position 3, it would occur around the middle of the tribulation. Position 4, just prior to the return of Christ. Position 5, it would be between the second coming of Christ and the millennium. Position 6, at the end of the millennium. So they're saying that these 6 views on Gog and Magog are the common 6 positions that were held then. I can say, pretty much in religious futurist camps, that's probably about where you would land also. Well, why do you not make more modest claims? Why don't you say, well, look, this is our reason for believing. Some do, some are more tender and more gentle than others, but look at this. That's very, very curious. Oh, Gog and Magog future. Well, which future? How are you even interpreting this? they should say the seventh position, as the first position in my view, is the Gog and Magog events are clearly prophesied and indicated to have happened just after the return of the exiles. People in Ezekiel's day, where Ezekiel prophesied it, saw it happening and knew. Now, this is not unusual. Jeremiah uses similar language, cosmic events prophesied and so on. He uses very similar language about an event that people in his day would see. Jeremiah and Ezekiel were contemporaries, but that is the fall of Jerusalem, the destruction there. So this is not uncommon in those days. So, why didn't they list the position I'm sharing is the first one? Again, Ezekiel made prophetic statements about things that people saw, lived to see. Mordecai would have been one of those. And, Mordecai, one of the stars in the book of Esther. He used similar language that Jeremiah used to talk about events coming in his day. And Jeremiah was just a little bit before Ezekiel. All right, now, Truth Unchained. This is in reference to the fact that it says in the book of Ezekiel, in prophetic language, that that after this war, Israel will burn the weapons of warfare for 7 years, and it'll take 7 months to bury the bodies. Now, once you sort of see the prophetic language going on, you say, okay, 7 means fulfillment, probably not 7 literal years. But many Bible teachers today, many others will say 7 literal years of burning things. Okay, well, how does this work? What's going on here? How do you burn weapons for 7 years? And the theories are amazing that are out there, ladies and gentlemen. It's wonderful to watch them. One theory is that, is this the place? All right, let's do this one here. They make the point that this is Truth Unchained, and talking about the 7 years of the weapons being burned. They say, oh, well, gold, silver, bronze, iron, copper, wood, that won't burn for 7 years. The wood might, but there wouldn't be 7 years. So he's talking about those medieval weapons. He's saying, yes, but in these days, there are modern weapons. How are they going to burn for 7 years? That's a good question. 7 years is a long time to burn, the stuff in a battlefield up. All right. And then they say, excuse me, let me just grab a drink of coffee here. They say gold, silver, bronze, iron, copper, wood won't burn for 7 years, but uranium can. Oh, so all of this depleted uranium weaponry that's being used and so on, that can be converted into reactor uranium, and that will burn for years and years and years. Oh, dear Lord. Oh, my. Depleted uranium back to your reactor uranium, burning for 7 years. The whole land would be catastrophically destroyed by fallout. And of course, they have more to say about that. So in other words, we have this literal 7 years. We've got to deal with it. How are you going to burn weapons for 7 years? Well, now there is another really interesting theory. And let me see here. Yes, this will be a good time to talk about that. There is a product out of Holland called lignostone. And lignostone is a kind of an artificial wood type product, extremely strong, very, very durable. And it's used in building. It's probably a little stronger than MDF or whatever. And you can search it, lignostone. And what I'd heard, and I heard this about 35 years ago, that Russians were building their tanks with lignostone, effectively plywood, right? And that these would be invisible to radar, and that they were building their military equipment with this. And the lignostone will burn, right? It's a wood type of product. And so therefore, all these wooden tanks would make it into the land during Armageddon. They'd be destroyed by God, and then the locals would chop these things up and burn them for 7 years. I kid you not. I checked. There are still people who hold this position out there. You can find it, lignostone, Gog and Magog. And it's like, I can't believe people are still holding this. Let me tell you about Russian tanks, ladies and gentlemen. Really good quality metal. Steel, the best. You can see how they're made. Nobody's making tanks out of plywood. And this is so stupid, because if you made the tank itself, the external of the tank, out of plywood to avoid being hit by radar, the metal bits inside would most certainly be picked up and reflected by the radar. So it's ridiculous. It's dumb. Why don't you make modest claims? But you can see how desperate people are to do this. Okay, so again, you've got this need to do it. So what they've done is they've taken prophetic language that is full of symbolic numbers, and they've driven this prophetic language into our day, and they've turned those into literal numbers. Okay, now this is just not the way prophecy or scripture works. Now, finally, in my last one of the day, how is my time going? Hey, not too bad. There's a website called the Park Forum. John Tillman is the writer there. Actually writes, as an author, he writes really well. But he, in his statement on Gog and Magog, or one of his responses, he makes an enormous self-contradictory statement. Just very self-contradictory. He says this prophecy is full of poetic symbolism. Right, I agree. Thank you. Yes, poetic prophetic symbolism. Absolutely. But look how he contradicts what he just said. Then he goes on, he says, an interesting detail is that weapons are going to burn for 7 years. Hang on here. This prophecy is full of prophetic symbolism, prophetic numbers, all of it. Yes, I get that. I understand. It's poetic, prophetic language. Yes, you can read it. You can see the structure of it. By the way, here's a literal detail. So what he's done is he said, this is prophetic and this is literal. Now, this is what happens all the time when you try to futurize those prophecies. Some things are literal. You think, you grab them, you pull them off into our time or into the future. Some things are prophetic language. You say, I don't know, don't get it, so you leave it there, or whatever. And this is really how this whole internal set of internal contradictions works. It is truly, totally fascinating. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've just passed the 20 minutes. We've had a little look at some of the, what I would say, extreme views on the Gog and Magog as future, and why holding Gog and Magog as future and unfulfilled demands these types of positions or these views. And we're saying, no, listen, in Ezekiel's day, he prophesied an event that is recorded in the book of Esther. Why else do you think Esther was kept in the Bible by the Holy Spirit over those years, right? Prophesied an event recorded in the book of Esther as something that people in Ezekiel's day would actually see. One of those people there was more than likely Mordecai, who was one of the captives all this time. Whether him and Ezekiel were pals or not is hard to say, but Ezekiel was very, very influential in those days. Now, to get a little background, you'll need to look at the previous video just on time and history, the one before that, which is the quick snapshot of this, and in the same playlist, Pastor Kevin McDonald's historical look at the Esther story, which I do believe is really, really valuable. I actually learned some things, or been reminded of things. I think I learned some things from it, but I'd completely forgotten on the Esther story. And so that lays the foundation for this. There you go. My name is Al Persohn. If you can contact me at pastor@mascot.church, or in the comments below if you like. Come back again soon for more.